Hello and welcome to Did You Know Gaming Extra. Today we'll be covering regional differences in games as well as some censorship. What's culturally understood or accepted by the majority in one country may not be in another. This ranges from extremes to tiny details, and games adjust in both big and small ways to compensate for these differences. Kingdom Hearts, a series featuring a multitude of characters from popular Disney's children's movies, is one series that you'd think wouldn't have too many regional alterations, but that isn't the case. Kingdom Hearts 2 has a scene in which Donald attempts to get away from his girlfriend Daisy. One animation was changed in the Western release of the game, and simply shows Daisy scolding Donald from the front. In the Japanese release, however, the scene shows her actually spanking Donald on his backside as he faces away. It's possible this scene was altered to remove any hints of domestic violence, or perhaps because the skit could have been seen to have odd sexual connotations. This was a clear example of censorship altering elements of a Japanese game for a Western audience, but the same can also be said in many Western games that were brought to Japan. One example can be seen with Grand Theft Auto 5, which originally featured a slew of sexual content featuring everything from strippers to crude artwork. During a scene in the mission Reuniting the Family, Michael tattoos a cartoon phallus across Laszlo's back. After the game was taken to Japan, this tattoo had to be replaced, though the developers seemed to have some fun with the censorship, deciding instead to make Michael tattoo a rocket ship. Another title that dealt with localization issues was Civilization 4. With the Civilization series, there were a number of issues that could have easily sprung up when being localized, as the game heavily pulls from real and sometimes controversial historical figures. One inclusion caused concern for the People's Republic of China, as the game featured the founder of their nation, Mao Zedong, also known as Chairman Mao, the ruler of China from 1949 to 1976. As the game involves the establishment of civilizations, this also includes the act of war. The government was unhappy about this element of the game, specifically the fact that the Chinese players would be able to declare war against the founder of their nation. As such, Mao was replaced by Emperor Taizong of Tang, a cultural figure who had fewer deep ties with China's current society and affairs. Emperor Taizong was the second emperor during the Tang dynasty, ruling from 626 to 649 AD. There's less controversy with this next example of regional changes, but it's still rather interesting. In Paper Mario Color Splash, a washing machine and the room it appears in are completely different between NTSC and PAL regions. This is likely because the design of the washing machine in the Japanese and American versions of the game is rarely used in modern-day Europe and other PAL nations. It was likely this was changed so that it was more recognizable to European players. And now it's time for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today we'll be talking about Sega's Virtua Tennis 2. Acclaim, the game's publisher in the United Kingdom and Europe, wanted to promote the game at the Wimbledon tennis tournament by training a bunch of homing pigeons and painting the Virtua Tennis 2 logo on them. Acclaim tried to train the pigeons specifically to fly straight at people spectating the tournament and flap in front of them. Andrew Block, founder of the PR firm attached to Acclaim, told Kotaku, "We did some publicity around it. We invited media down to see the homing pigeons being trained. This caused much disgust among Wimbledon officials, who sent out a press release to say they were training their hawks to hunt down the pigeons and they would be killed. It got talked about on the BBC, on Wimbledon commentary, and in every single national newspaper. You couldn't hope for better publicity." Today we'll be looking at video game comic book adaptations. When a game series becomes popular, it will almost inevitably become a fully fledged franchise that spans toys and other forms of media, whether it be film, television, or even comic books. The Super Mario franchise is of course no exception. Mario has spawned numerous cartoon series, a Hollywood movie with another one reportedly on the way, and hundreds of comic books. However, we're going to be talking about one perhaps lesser known book. We've previously mentioned iQue, a company created by Nintendo and Dr. Wei Yen to circumnavigate the Chinese video game console ban. According to Chinese Nintendo on Twitter, the iQue version of the Game Boy Advance SP came bundled with a CD-ROM. In the data of this disk is a file named IQ Reader with no extension. Checking the file's data reveals that this is actually a ROM for a Game Boy Advance cartridge, and by giving the file the extension .gba and running it through an emulator or flash cartridge, it is revealed to be a reader application for the Game Boy Advance. By booting the ROM, the player can read an article written by Dr. Wei Yen himself, as well as a 45-page Super Mario comic entirely written in Mandarin. The comic is a first chapter in a series that seemingly was never released. In Mario's Great Adventure, Toad tells Mario and Luigi that Peach has built a museum and baked a cake in Mario's honor. Then, a bomb explodes, distracting Toad and the brothers. Bowser swoops in and kidnaps the princess, and Mario must fight off a horde of Goombas and a piranha plant. Toad then explains that there are 5 stars of power in the universe, and together they need to collect them all to defeat Bowser and save Princess Peach. The team travels to Yoshi's Island in search of the next star. Here they meet Yoshi, and Toad gives a brief presentation explaining that Yoshis are native to the island, are very intelligent, like fruit, and are friendly to people. After a little more hijinks, the party learns from a block that little Bowser has already stolen the star from the island, and Yoshi can lead them to the Happy Tree to help them find it. The comic features some cultural humor, like a joke about how much rice Yoshi can eat, a joke about drinking tea, and the typical slapstick of Eastern cartoons, such as Peach smashing Mario into the ground for not paying enough attention to her, then quickly returning to her sweet demeanor. There is also a very meta joke in which Peach shows Mario a framed image of the first time he saved her. This is clearly a still from the very start of the first Super Mario Bros. Game. She then explains that someone made the adventure into a game and it has sold 40 million copies. An oddity that we found when looking through the ROM's data is sprites from Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, though they don't appear to be used anywhere within the reader application itself. The Final Fantasy series is another franchise which has spawned many spin-offs. At one stage, the series was even set to receive its own line of comics by Disney. The company made plans to produce 4 issues of a comic book series based on the franchise, with several of today's popular comic book creators working on the project. Writer Kurt Busiek, artist Del Barras, and all-round badman Mike Mignola, the creator of Hellboy. Plans began in 1992 during a period when the comic book industry was booming. At the time, Disney had created its own printing company, Hollywood Comics, mostly consisting of adaptations. Kurt Busiek said that he wrote the whole script for the entire 4-issue run that was planned, with at least 2 of those issues being penciled by Barras and 4 completed cover illustrations finished by Mignola. Advertisements for the series appeared within other issues released by Hollywood Comics in 1992, but with the studio closing its doors in 1993, the series never saw a commercial release. Busiek commented on the project several years later. He wrote, "I did a story outline and the people at Squaresoft liked it a lot, but said, well, this is good, but we're about to do a new version of the game. Can you revise it to be about Final Fantasy II instead?" It required a top-to-toe restart because the characters in Final Fantasy were foot sloggers, ordinary soldiers, and adventurers, while the characters in FF2 were princes and leaders and such, which makes a whole different kind of story. But yes, it was based on Final Fantasy II, though Del Barras' interpretation of Japanese design maintained basic designs but spun it into a very, very mainstream American style. It's worth noting that when Busiek refers to Final Fantasy II, he is actually talking about the original Final Fantasy IV, which was released in America under a different number at the time. Another comic book series that was halted while in production was Star Raiders, based on the 1979 Atari game of the same name. Written by Elliot S. Maggin, who is known for being the lead writer of the Superman comics in the 1970s, and painted by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, who is also known for his work with DC. The limited comic was commissioned as a series of inserts for the game, and would span 120 pages. However, due to the American video game crash of 1983, Atari had to cancel this deal. With 40 pages already finished, DC decided to commission 20 more and release it as a 60-page graphic novel and use it to launch DC's graphic novel series. And now for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today we're talking about the Crash Bandicoot N. Sane trilogy. In the boss fight with Tighe in Crash Bandicoot Warped, if the player stands on the top left corner of the arena as the lions are coming out, the audience will start throwing cheese at them. This is a reference to an exploit in the original version of the game where the player could hide in the corner to avoid damage. In today's episode, we're exploring the world of banned words and phrases in games. The internet has practically become a supplement to gaming, with certain websites, apps, and social media platforms all being part of gaming culture. Online communities gain a reputation quickly when toxicity runs rampant, but these communities can also form long-lasting friendships and invoke positivity. As many companies begin to form their own user bases, it's unsurprising that they'd want to control what's discussed, shared, or created within their games. This is why developers will apply their own filters disallowing certain words from being used. Understandably, these limitations are typically placed on racial slurs or swear words, but sometimes they can restrict usage of some fairly benign or weird words and phrases. With the release of Red Dead Redemption 2, some gamers noticed limitations on what they could and couldn't name their horse. We put this to the test and we found the words Nintendo, Microsoft, Xbox, Sony, and PlayStation were all banned when trying to name the steed. As it turns out, these words are also banned in other Rockstar games. The company keeps an internal list of words they don't want appearing in any of their games. Console manufacturers usually have a global list of banned words that can't be used within their system, but some developers like to have their own words list as well, just to be safe. It's likely that Rockstar included these terms to make sure that users couldn't pretend to represent companies in online games, or use the games to make disparaging content about certain companies. While the expected standard naughty words and their variations can be found in the list, several unusual terms can also be found. This includes curious choices such as babushka, a misspelling of the word babushka meaning grandmother in Russian, and deicide, a term meaning the killing of God. The list also contains terms relating to torrenting websites BT Junkie, Demonoid, Fenopy, ISO Hunt, Zshare, VCDQ, and Pirate Bay. This was likely an effort to stop pirates from using online Rockstar games to share information about torrenting websites. A number of these sites have been shut down, some for several years, indicating that once words have been added to the list, they are rarely removed. While this censorship is often made with the best of intentions, in the case of the Pokemon Global Trading System, there were some unforeseen side effects. The Pokemon Global Trading System, or GTS, was first introduced in Generation 4 of the Pokemon franchise. This system includes a keyword filter that stops players giving their Pokemon rude or offensive names and sharing them with the world. However, players of Pokemon Black and White noticed a simple problem with this kind of filter, as a number of the original names for Pokemon would also trigger the filter. While trading with people in Japan wasn't a problem, and players could even list these Pokemon for trade, no one in North America or PAL regions were actually able to see the listings. Just 3 examples of the affected Pokemon are Nosepass, Probopass, and Frostlass. Because the names of all 3 Pokemon contain the word ass, the GTS profanity filter was triggered when trying to trade them. These Pokemon and many others could only be successfully traded to North American and PAL players by giving the Pokemon a nickname before offering it. It seems as though Nintendo did eventually patch this out of the game, and all Pokemon became tradable across all regions without having to be renamed. Publishing giant EA also encountered issues with Battlefield 5 because of their banned words filter. EA went somewhat overboard with how they restricted discussions in-game and in bizarre ways. During the game's beta period, users reported an extensive volume of phrases and terms that couldn't be talked about in chat. For example, users weren't able to send the abbreviation DLC unless it was prefixed by the word free. Other terms include put on, nut, white man, and lag. Even the term Nazi was banned, which is odd considering the game is set during World War II. A member of Battlefield 5's team responded to the situation with a message on the game's open beta forums. It read, "One of the new features we've been working on is a profanity filter in-game to reduce toxicity. We have heard some complaints that the filter is blocking words that aren't profanity and shouldn't be blocked, like DLC. Please note this is a work in progress, and we'll be taking this feedback to tweak the sensitivity of the filter and improve its usage without censoring relevant conversation. Healthy discussion is what drives improvement in our games, and we'd never want to impede that. Thanks for bringing up your concerns to us regarding the current iteration of the profanity filter, and we'll keep working on it." It should be noted that the thread on the forum in which it was posted was immediately closed after posting, meaning that nobody could actually respond directly to the message. And now it's time for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today we'll be taking a look at the classic PlayStation 1 JRPG, Grandia. During a pre-development interview of the game, art director Hidenobu Takahashi revealed the origin and meaning of the title Grandia. Takahashi stated, "The title Grandia comes from a Formula 1 car. To us, it means a variety of specialists coming together to challenge themselves with a new design. How can we create something amazing? That's the simple question we ask when we're developing a game, and we'll work ourselves to the bone to answer it. It's the same as an F1 team, where they get specialists from all different fields together to build the fastest car. Hello and welcome to Did You Know Gaming Extra. Today we'll be exploring cheating in games and its consequences. For a long time, cheating was considered a fun aside to a game's content. Unlocking additional content, skipping past hard levels, or changing how a game plays were all included by developers to give players another way to have fun. However, with multiplayer being a huge part of many titles these days, cheating through external applications or unintended methods can result in consequences for those looking to get the upper hand in their gaming. In December of 2016, the government of South Korea passed a law specifically targeting the creation and distribution of hacks for video games, as well as the distribution of private servers. This comes as part of a growing problem with hacking in the country, particularly with competitive games like Overwatch. Reportedly, 10% of Grandmaster level players are utilizing aimbots, as well as 3 to 4% that are potentially nukers. Nuking is a hack that allows the player to access not just the opposing team's controls, but also elements of the core mechanics. This includes freezing players in place, keeping the enemy team in their spawn for an extra minute, switching hero locations in the middle of a game, kicking opposing players, and even completely restarting the game in a new map. This level of cheating is made possible because of a deal Blizzard has struck with gaming cafes known as PC bangs in South Korea. The deal allows players to pay roughly $1 on average to play Overwatch for an hour, creating a new account each time they play. Unfortunately, this means that if an account is banned for hacking, the player can simply start a new account and continue cheating. The new anti-cheating law that came into full effect in June 2017 imposes a fine of up to $43,000 or even a prison sentence of up to 5 years for those caught cheating. After an almost year-long investigation, in January of 2018, Seoul Metropolitan Police arrested 13 Overwatch players. 2 of the hackers have received their sentence at the time of this video. One of them will face jail time if they violate the conditions of their 2-year probation period, and the other received a fine of 10 million won, which is roughly $9,300. This isn't the first time that Blizzard have had to drop the ban hammer. In 2010, Blizzard began waves of mass banning accounts for cheating in the real-time strategy game StarCraft 2. The most common form of cheating at the time was map hacking, which allowed the player to view enemy activity at all times, despite the fact it's supposed to be shrouded in the fog of war. However, these bans sparked controversy, as Blizzard also took it upon themselves to not only ban players cheating in the online multiplayer, but also players cheating against AI opponents and in the story mode of the game. This means that any player caught cheating in any form would have their access to StarCraft 2 revoked from their Battle.net account, completely locking them out of the game. This would force them to purchase a new copy with a new account if they wish to continue playing. Blizzard claimed that these bans were enforced because of the over 400 achievements in the game. Quote, "While single-player games only appear to be you and the computer at first, your achievements and gamer score also carry weight and prestige for your online play." However, unsatisfied with this response, Cheat Happens content editor Chris O'Rourke fired back at Blizzard, saying that as long as a player's actions don't affect other players' games in any way, as well as having no impact on multiplayer ladders, gamers should be free to cheat as much as they like. O'Rourke stated, "Achievements are meant to mark a certain individual's milestones within the game. They have no bearing on multiplayer standings, matches, or games, regardless of what Blizzard might say." Others also argued that Blizzard could implement a similar feature to that of Xbox Live, having the achievements lock automatically while cheats are active. And now it's time for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today we're talking about the Xbox 360 version of Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Burning Earth. The 360 version of the game became popular upon release, as it was extremely easy to unlock every achievement in the game. Some people were even able to attain a full 1000 gamer score in under 3 minutes of starting the game, which made the implementation of the achievements seem quite lazy. When questioned about the easiness of getting a full 1000 gamer score from the game, Director of Production at THQ, John Cartwright, stated that it was because children were the target demographic for the game. Cartwright elaborated, telling MTV, If someone's been playing fighting games for years, then the achievements in Avatar are not going to challenge them too much. But again, we're not targeting that gamer. We try to focus on the thrill a young kid would get when he or she receives his or her first achievement. We feel having some easier achievements makes the whole achievement system more accessible to a younger audience.
Hello, and welcome to Did You Know Gaming Extra. Today, we're exploring trivia around video game ratings boards such as the ESRB. All games must be given an age rating for the regions of the world that they're released in, and games have to be submitted to a different board for each region. In preparation for their reveal of the Labo line of peripherals and games, Nintendo sent the product to the German ratings board, the USK, for evaluation. After Nintendo revealed Labo to the public, the board sent out a tweet reading, "Finally, we can tell the story. When we had the latest Nintendo hardware, it was almost dumped by the cleaning crew as waste paper. In the past, no one would have believed this story anyway." It seems the board's cleaners hadn't been clued in to what Labo actually was, and mistook the Labo sets for garbage. As much of the game revolves around the use of handcrafted materials made out of cardboard, this seems like a fairly simple mistake to make. The rating given to a game or product is very important, and can make or break its success due to the limitations that each rating brings. When a game is given a higher rating, the potential market is reduced, as well as stores that are willing to stock it. Because of this, companies usually aim for the lowest age rating they can get, and are even willing to cut features and assets from their products to achieve a certain rating. In a reversal of this practice, American McGee stated that he actually fought to get American McGee's Alice a mature rating. McGee said, "You know, when we were working on Alice, I actually fought to get a mature rating because I felt that I didn't want an Alice product to hit the shelves at Christmas and confuse parents into thinking it was for their kids." Looking back on that, I wish that I had not fought for the M rating because I think that the violence in the game never really warranted it. I think that as long as an industry is self-regulating, and I think as long as individuals take responsibility, the government shouldn't have to step in to regulate entertainment. With Fallout 3, Bethesda had to make alterations in order for the game to even hit store shelves in Australia, something which was not uncommon for the country. During development, the player was to be able to obtain various real-world drugs, such as morphine. These drugs are called chems in the final game, and are used to cure ailments or provide buffs. Restrictions in Australia forced Bethesda to withdraw the use of real-world drug names, resulting in items such as morphine being renamed Med-X. This was partly because the board felt that the use of the drugs in-game promoted the use of real-world drugs. Their report stated, "Corresponding with the list of various chems are small visual representations of the drugs. These include syringes, tablets, pill bottles, a crack-type pipe, and blister packs." In the board's view, these realistic visual representations of drugs and their delivery method bring the science fiction drugs in line with real-world drugs. Many were upset over this decision, as it showed inconsistency in the ratings board system. While Fallout 3 is set in a fantasy world based on a post-apocalyptic future, other titles featuring drug use were often given a pass, such as Call of Cthulhu and Half-Life. The issue likely stemmed from the fact that, unlike earlier titles, Fallout 3 made acknowledgements to the addictive nature of these drugs through a dedicated mechanic in the game. Although most games that can't meet a certain age rating simply lose some of their potential audience, the situation for Bethesda was a lot more dire. At the time of Fallout 3's release, there was no adult R18+ rating available for games. This meant that if a game failed to achieve an M rating, said game would be denied a retail release. Bethesda ultimately made the decision to change their game. And now for this episode's random trivia. Today we're talking about the Tony Hawk franchise, and unfortunately, it's Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5. One of the working titles for the game was simply Tony Hawk 5. We know this because the name was accidentally leaked by a caterer at a brand summit for the game before it had its final title. The caterer shared an image of the event to his Instagram and Facebook before the game had been officially announced. Hello ho ho, and welcome to Did You Know Gaming Extramus. Today's trivia is all about Christmas and things linked to the holiday. So sit back and relax while we put you in the holiday spirit. It's not uncommon for games to join in with the festive cheer around Christmas time, with a few titles even changing their appearance to fit the festivities. One of the games that does this is Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games. When playing the game in December, Santa Claus can be found as a VIP character. Rather than giving the player 100 star tokens, as is normally the case for special VIP guests, he will instead reward them with 300 star tokens, almost as though it's a special little gift from the developers themselves. Our festive trivia isn't limited to in-game gifts though. Content can often be left out of a final release of a game, be it unfinished features, unused character graphics, and even music. One game with unused music is Street Fighter III, which has an unused track that appears to be a remix of the classic Christmas song, Jingle Bells. While the music is unused, the game features a stage for the character Sean, which has a strong Christmas theme in a New York City street. It's possible that the unused tune was originally planned to play on this stage, though its short duration suggests it may not have been used simply as background music. Another hit arcade game, Centipede, has received a variety of home ports over the years, even seeing a release on current-gen consoles. Some versions of the game are more noteworthy than others, however. Hidden messages can be found within the data of the Intellivision port of the game, the first of which reading, "Why are you disassembling this code? That isn't nice." Also included is a simple greeting from a few members of staff who worked on the game, but also a rather unfunny knock-knock joke. Knock knock.
Who's there?
Santa.
Santa who?
Santa Pete is coming to town. Simpsons Hit and Run also enjoys getting into the holiday spirit. During the game's menu screen, depending on the date, the Simpsons living room will change to fit the current holiday. These include Thanksgiving, Halloween, and of course, Christmas Day. Homer isn't the only character who's down for Christmas fun. If players boot up Ready to Rumble Boxing Round 2 on Christmas Day, Celine Strike will wear an elf costume, and the Rumble Man will simply become a giant snowman. The design of the game's ring will also change to be a tad more Christmassy. Unfortunately, some games in the Western world were made less Christmassy. When localizing the character of Olaf in the Game Boy Advance title Advance Wars, it seems that Nintendo wanted to lose their small piece of seasonal cheer. In the international release of the game, Olaf has a brown beard and a peaked officer's cap. Originally, however, the Japanese release has Olaf sporting white hair and a hat very reminiscent of Santa Claus. This made his overall appearance very similar to Santa, albeit blue instead of red, and his officer's uniform seemed almost like a Union suit instead. And now it's time for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today we're looking at the Kingdom Hearts series, or more specifically, Axel. It isn't hard to see similarities between Axel's personality and appearance with those of Reno from Final Fantasy VII. Both characters have spiky red hair, facial scars, and a cocky, cynical, yet charming personality. This was not a coincidence, though they are also not the same character renamed a la Leon and Squall from Final Fantasy VIII. When asked about the similarities between the two, Nomura stated, "To me, Axel is an existence close to Reno, created in the same concept, but they are different people. Those two are different people but subconsciously alike. I wanted to see how it would be to have completely different characters that are really similar to each other, but hold different kinds of roles in different worlds."
Hello and welcome to Did You Know Gaming Extra. Today we'll be talking about video game facts relating to religion. In order to avoid controversy, most publishers in the Western market try to avoid or minimize religious symbolism within their games. In some cases, religion can play a central role in the game's plot, and as time has moved forward, the strict attempts to keep religion out of games has been loosened. However, this doesn't mean that religion hasn't been rammed into games where it has no relevance. With Sonic R, one of the game's programmers decided to sneak in a piece of his Christian beliefs. The ichthys symbol, also known by many as the Jesus fish, is a symbol used by some Christians to show their faith, with its full name and meaning in English being Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. Practicing Christian John Burton, the lead programmer for Sonic R, hid this symbol on the resort island level on one of the track's huts. It's likely that this small Easter egg slipped by Sega before the game was sent out for publishing. As time goes on, many have opened up to the freedom of expression that comes with games and the themes that they choose to cover. This even includes satirical approaches to the subject, as seen with titles such as Fight of Gods. The game was designed as a joke, making use of gods in a standard fighting game genre. The game, which was put up for sale for only $8 in 2017, caused a commotion in Malaysia. The Malaysian government forced a countrywide block against the game's distribution service, Steam, making the Steam store inaccessible. In response to these extreme measures, the game's publisher, P-Cube, stated, "Fight of Gods is a video game that takes a humorous approach to religion in the same way that other entertainment formats have. This game is not promoting any religious agenda and is not designed to offend. We fully respect the choice of those who would not wish to play it. We are disappointed that such freedom of choice is not given to everyone, and in particular that the game has been forcibly removed from sale in Malaysia." Rajan Zed, a Nevada-based Hindu statesman, claimed that the game trivialized revered religious figures, that it was disrespectful, inappropriate, and could be disturbing to those of faith. He went on to say that highly revered religious figures are not meant to be reduced to just a character in a video game to be used in combat in a virtual battleground. Valve eventually blocked the game from sale and distribution in Malaysia, and Steam's ban was ultimately lifted. Fight of Gods isn't the only game where you can take on a real-world religious figure. In Dragon Quest VII for the original PlayStation, there's a battle where the player can literally fight God. The battle is optional and can be found in the game's first bonus dungeon. If the player manages to beat God in 20 turns or less, they receive a valuable reward. In the Nintendo 3DS remake of the game, this boss was ultimately renamed to the Almighty, likely to avoid any backlash from religious groups. And now it's time for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today we'll be talking about Marvel's Superheroes vs. Street Fighter for the arcade. The Japanese release of the game features an additional character known as Norimaru. This character is based on the Japanese comedian Noritake Kanashi. And because Kanashi isn't well known outside of Japan, he was kept exclusive to the region. Evidence shows that the character was intended to be in the English release at some point, however, as all of his dialogue had English translations in the code of the Western release. By looking through the game's data, it's also possible to find some pretty bizarre unused content surrounding the fighter as well. A hyper combo attack can be found which would have had Norimaru fantasizing about a Capcom character in a suggestive pose, followed by an aggressive nosebleed which can attack an enemy in the air. His fantasies include Chun-Li, Sakura, Cammy, Morrigan, Felicia, Anita, and Zangief. I mean, he is a hunk. Another attack which was left out of the game, including having its graphics removed altogether, was demoed in a Japanese promotional video. The attack would have seen the character sticking his fingers up his opponent's rear end, an action known as kancho in Japan. Kancho is considered to be a game or trick that is played on school-aged children involving sticking your fingers up somebody's butt when they aren't looking.
Hello, and welcome to Did You Know Gaming Extra. Today we're talking about dedicated video game developers. More so now than ever, games receive updates after their initial release. Whether this is to fix bugs in the game, improve optimization, or change the balance of gameplay, these patches can be integral to an entirely satisfying gaming experience. That said, some developers have been known to leave their games in what could be considered an unfinished state. The same cannot be said for Unreal World. Unreal World is a shareware game developed by Sammy Marinen and Erka Lamus, released in 1992, and eventually saw a release on Steam in February of 2016. The roguelike survival game has been receiving consistent updates for more than 25 years, the most recent of which being in April 2018 at the time of this recording. Starting out as an ASCII game running on DOS, the game took place in the medieval high fantasy world of Ankenia. The game featured a multi-level dungeon for the player to explore, and in 1994, the first big update took place, version 2.00b, which moved the players out of dungeons and into a predefined open wilderness scattered with randomized dungeons. A year later, version 2.04 began the removal of the high fantasy aspects of the story, changing the player's choice of class from mystical beings like mages, elves, and orcs to selecting from early cultures like tribal, Viking, and mountaineer. The world is now an undefined ancient northern country, though some fantasy creatures still remained in the dungeons. The wilderness was also changed to be randomly generated, and plants for foraging were also added. In 1999, with version 2.30, the game was almost unrecognizable and more closely resembles the game we have today, stepping away from ASCII art and transitioning into a fully sprite-based user interface. This is also the year the first CD-ROM version of the game was created for use in public libraries, under the title Iron Age Now. Between 2000 and 2004, the game saw more key changes, settling the game into Iron Age Finland for the locale. Sammy, one of the game's developers, wanted to take the game further into the cultural roots of ancient Finland. He said, "I wanted to share my growing personal enthusiasm towards traditional northern lifestyle, and our great mythology and folklore in the game." During this period, they also removed currency from the game, adding agriculture and hideworking, further pushing the game into the self-sufficient survival playstyle. As time went on, countless graphical and mechanical changes were made, as well as terrain, plants and other wildlife, and even a nutrition system. Currently in version 3.50, Unreal World was awarded the Guinness World Record for longest update support for a game, and still receives excellent reviews for its depth and variety. Demonstrations of dedication come in all forms, however, not just working on the same love letter project for years. On occasion, it's shown by working during the toughest of situations. Sometimes, an illness can push a developer to strive for more. And after being diagnosed with cancer, Crashlands developer Sam Costa wanted to do more with his up-and-coming indie studio, Butterscotch Shenanigans. During his treatment, he worked with his brother on their Endless Runner mobile title, which they'd been creating before the news hit. In an interview with Kotaku, Costa said, "I just looked at him and said, I don't want this to be the last game I make before I die. No offense, but it's a mobile Endless Runner. Everyone's gonna forget about this in 6 minutes. It might make a dime for the studio, but who gives a fuck? I wanted to do something that at least had a little more cultural memory for someone, or even to make something that could help someone in a similar situation to my own." Game development was treated as an escape for Costa, a place to get away from the probing, treatment, and stress surrounding him and his diagnosis. His two brothers, who joined him on his venture to create the game, would even work on features that would give Sam more to do while restrained to his hospital bed. Crashlands released, and Sam was similarly released from his diagnosis. His scans came up clear, and he was given the chance to create another day. Another dedicated team of developers are Valve Software, who never seem to let a game die. Although Half-Life 3 has spent the longest out of Valve's games in development hell, there's another that comes in at a close second. Team Fortress 2 was in development for 9 years between 1998 and 2007, during which it was heavily reworked multiple times. Early in the game's development, the title was a fairly realistic war game featuring lifelike weapons and clothing, as well as parachute drops into enemy territory. Although the military theme carried through to the end of development, there were some fairly experimental phases in TF2's creation. At one point, the game actually contained aliens, and an image of an alien commander from this period was even leaked online. This version of the game has been referred to as the invasion period of TF2's development. One of the game's designers, Robin Walker, has also stated that the team went through probably 3 to 4 different games before the direction of the final game was decided upon. And now for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today we're looking at popular simulation series The Sims 2. For the release of The Sims 2 University expansion, a new musical track was added titled Arc of the Sims, which would play whenever the player entered build mode. This track was created for the expansion, but was later used in an unexpected way. The track was used for the gag reel featured on the DVD for the 4th season of Breaking Bad.
I'll bang whoever I want to bang. Yeah, if I want to bang a Yui, I'll bang a Yui.
I've banged you before in the life.
Wait. It's fine.
Hello and welcome to Did You Know Gaming Extra. Today we'll be exploring dishonesty in the gaming industry. It would be impossible to do an episode about video game related lies without looking at Peter Molyneux. Whilst Molyneux is known for lying as a marketing strategy, enough for it to become a gaming meme, his lies aren't always to customers. Molyneux entered the software industry in the 1980s, creating database software for use by businesses alongside Les Edgar. However, with the increase in video game production following the release of the Amiga home computer, the duo wanted to tap into the gaming market. Their first break into video games came after a friend made Druid 2 for the Atari ST. Needing to find a team that could port to the Amiga, Edgar and Molyneux became interested, even though they had no experience with game development. Edgar told Now Gamer about how the two managed to land this debut gig. "We lied about our abilities and got the project. Although we didn't make any money from this, we learnt how to move sprites on the screen and develop our own basic routines for animation. Turns out that games are just a big database. That was handy." And from there, Bullfrog was born. The company had continued success and was acquired by gaming giant EA in 1995. Bullfrog ultimately closed its doors in 2001 after much of the team was shuffled into other areas of EA. When it comes to retro titles, there's a common belief that the games on consoles like the NES are extremely difficult, and many players point the blame at how these games punish failure. NES games often featured elements such as very limited lives and continues which were carried over from the arcade games. This would push the player back to the start of the game, tempting players to pay more and outdo their previous efforts. One title which is considered by many to be particularly difficult is the original Ninja Gaiden. Upon the loss of a life, the player is sent back to the beginning of the stage. This wasn't the original idea for the game, however. Hideo Yoshizawa, the game's director and writer, actually intended for players to respawn in the middle of a stage after they die. This feature was left out because one of the game's programmers simply lied to Yoshizawa about coding it in. The game's difficulty wasn't just frustrating to players, but even the development team. Artist and writer Masato Kato stated, "The game's difficulty was too hard, even for the development team. So during the bug checking process, team members were basically crying whilst trying to get through the game." One NES game tried to lure potential buyers in with a cash prize for beating it. This title is Action 52, a compilation cartridge notorious for being a poorly programmed and all-round awful game. Although the title's name makes reference to the 52 different games found on the cart, it's possible that the game would have been originally called Action 60. Evidence in the game's code suggests that there were another 8 games to be found on the cart. But this isn't why we're talking about Action 52. The game's creators, Active Enterprises, planned a cash draw for North American players who were able to complete level 8 of the game Ooze. The full prize was $52,000 cash as well as a $52,000 scholarship. The only catch with this contest was that, due to the game's poor programming, it is known to be impossible to actually progress past a certain point of Ooze where the game will lock up. As a result, the contest had no winner. However, a congratulations screen can still be found within the game's code. The only way of accessing this screen is through checking the game's data or using a cheat device. The team would have known that accessing this screen was impossible during the prize period, which was advertised to help sell the title. Lucky for Active Enterprises, this advertisement caused little controversy due to people being more upset with the state of the game itself and its $200 price tag. And now it's time for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today we're talking about one highly regarded PlayStation title, Wipeout. Despite this high regard, the game received poor publicity from a promotional poster released in the UK. Because the game's music struck a chord with the UK clubbing scene, the poster featured British DJ Sarah Cox. However, she was depicted with an excessively bloody nose reminiscent of an overdose. At the time of this poster's release, illegal drug use, such as ecstasy, was considered an incredibly dangerous element to the UK club culture. This led to many politicians claiming that the large E within the Wipeout logo was in fact a direct reference to ecstasy.
In today's episode, we're going to be exploring the wonderful world of bootleg games. The catalog of knockoff titles is pretty extensive. In many cases, bootleg games are simply a hastily constructed product, typically with reskinned assets from an already well-established title or franchise. With commercial releases, many will try to cash in on popular new titles while holding little to no resemblance of their inspiration. This can be seen with games such as Stardew Valley, which saw a mobile game use the Farming Life Sims title and little more. Stardew Valley Prison Bus 3D, or as it was later renamed, Prison Bus Driver Valley 3D, had no element of Stardew Valley contained within it. Instead, the player just controls a generic character as they drive around a fairly basic city. The game is notable as it has stayed on the Google Play Store after having changed its name, though evidence of its original plagiarism can still be seen within its URL. In fact, some games show little effort in trying to appear official, as can be seen with Skullgirls 2 Deadly Airport. The game had almost no similarities to Skullgirls, with the app icon being Poison from Final Fight. The app received some recognition online, with its description being regarded as a highlight of its release.
Skullgirls 2 Deadly Airport is one of the best and advanced Surly Magnificence fighting game of this era. Fight to earn your respect, put your anger in your mind, and smash opponent. It's a fight club, guys! Deadly Fight has magnificence graphics. Then, any other fighting game, it comes with best visual and sound effects. Hope you will enjoy it.
The game was actually acknowledged by the official Skullgirls Twitter account, jokingly tweeting, "Surprise! Skullgirls 2 Deadly Airport's now available on iOS!" before letting people know that the game would be removed quickly for being a complete ripoff. Jonathan Kim, senior animator for the creators of Skullgirls at Lab Zero Games, even made fan art for the title. However, games don't need to be new in order to try and cash in on another creator's IP. Nintendo only recently dipped into the mobile gaming market, but back in 2012, a bootleg release of Pokemon Yellow made its way onto the iOS App Store. Not aware of the app's unofficial nature, the app quickly rose to the second top-selling spot on Apple's charts. And rather than being inspired by the original Pokemon Yellow released on the Game Boy in 1998, the game's page instead used screenshots from what appears to be Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green for the Game Boy Advance. The game's description claimed that the app was just like the original, while many reviews claimed that it was, in fact, just a scam, and didn't boot past the initial title screen. Looking to understand how this situation came about, Apple's review process was called into question. The Apple App Store and the Google Play Store appear to almost never perform quality control, let alone legal checks on the apps in their marketplace, relying instead on the right holders filing complaints against fraudulent uses of their materials. Now, while this has worked with some applications in the past, many have survived this process through obscurity. They also rely on the hope that the right holders just won't go through the process of having the game removed. Now, because of the sheer volume of apps out there which ignore licensing from other companies, it's extremely difficult to track down sales information and revenue made off of the infringement. Most bootleg games seem to be made in China, a country with more lax copyright laws. And since the release of the fake Pokemon Yellow app, no other bootleg game has made its way into the top slots of the store. It seems that in the majority of cases, the apps forego the free-to-play microtransaction business model in favor of wall-to-wall-to-wall-to-wall advertisements on their game. Now, I hear you. You're wondering, well, who in their right mind would want to put their ad in a bootleg game? Don't they know any better? Well, that's kind of a funny story. The answer to that, actually, is many times other bootleg games and apps. And now for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today we are talking about Mega Man Soccer for the Super Nintendo. Upon completing the game's championship, tournament, or league mode, the game will simply cut back to the title screen. However, championship and tournament mode have complete in-game endings still in the game's data. In fact, they can even be viewed using a cheat device. There's even evidence suggesting that league mode was planned to have an ending as well.
Today we're delving into the depths of despair, bringing you some particularly spooky trivia from several games, perhaps even a few that you might not expect. That's right, it's a Halloween special. There's no scarier way of starting a Halloween video than discussing the advertising standards within the UK. Tekken 3 had a big release on the PlayStation in 1998, but this wasn't simply due to the success of the previous games. Amongst its various promotional pieces, one poster, which certainly didn't pull any punches, featured a morgue with 2 severed legs and the shape of a body under a cover. This poster caused offense to a whopping 10 people, who wrote into the Advertising Standards Authority to complain. Sony defended the ad, saying it was a surreal situation by positioning the body parts in the manner reminiscent of a cartoon character, but the ASA stood their ground, claiming it was realistic and macabre, with the fallout of this incident resulting in all advertising by Sony having to be vetted by the ASA for the following 2 years. This wasn't the only advertising incident that got Sony into trouble. At the same time, they were also reprimanded for a mail campaign for PlayStation accessories that sent out an envelope containing 4 fake X-rays and a letter telling the receiver to seek immediate medical attention. The letter was signed by a fake doctor, with the reverse of the letter stating that this is not a piece of genuine medical communication. Despite this information, the letter resulted in Sony receiving 53 complaints and the ASA taking 20 telephone complaints, mostly from people expecting genuine test results. From one severed body part to another, Super Monaco GP was a big success when it released in Japanese arcades, hitting number 2 in the arcade charts of Famitsu magazine, known as Famicom Sushin at the time, in August 1989. It proceeded to take top position in September, and held it until October that same year. Naturally, it invaded the home console and computer market the next year, with ports of the arcade hit being made for the Amiga, Spectrum, Sega Master System, and Genesis. But the Genesis edition in particular had an unusual hidden Easter egg. If the player holds down A, B, and C when finishing the second race in any of the top 3 positions in arcade mode, the player's racer will hold up their own severed head instead of a trophy. Now for a game that's infused with horror. The 2003 Game Boy Advance title Castlevania: Aria of Sorrow. The game has several interesting decisions behind some of its artistic direction, such as with the enemy skeletons featured throughout being based on the lead programmer Shutaro Aida. The reason the waiter skeletons throw curries is purely because Aida had a diet that consisted primarily of curry, even being known by some as Curry the Kid or Curry Gentleman Shutaro. Another Aida-inspired change came from the fact that Aida hates sushi, so sushi was removed from the possible foods that drop from enemies. There is some contention on the inspiration for the lead protagonist's name in Aria of Sorrow and Dawn of Sorrow, Soma Cruz. During a discussion within a developer roundtable in 2003, Koji Igarashi claimed the name Cruz came from a need to make the name more accessible to Western audiences, due to its association with the cross, and because at the time, Hollywood star Penelope Cruz had visited Japan. He also claims that the name Soma is taken from an Indian ritual drink of the same name, and that it's also the name of director Junichi Murakami's son. Murakami, however, dismissed this, saying, "It's just a coincidence, as the kanji are different too. When I first noticed it, I was like, no," but Koji Igarashi said, "I just can't think of anything else. Sorry." Another horror classic, Resident Evil 2, was so popular that it was ported to several consoles and PC, and even now has a full-blown remake. The series went on to be a flagship for Capcom, with Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 being in the top 5 best-selling games Capcom has ever produced, but confidence in the game's representation of the company wasn't always there. Director Hideki Kamiya claims the iconic opening scene of the umbrella can being stepped on was originally meant to feature the Capcom logo, but the then current Capcom manager did not approve of their brand being stepped on at the beginning of the game, and so it was changed. This isn't the only thing changed from the opening of the game, with the original plan being to start from within the iconic police station, with zombies attempting to get into the building. This was changed to have the player begin from outside, as this helped portray the extent at which the city had been taken over. It was also planned that Leon would eventually have to leave the station again, with stronger weapons, making him more capable of taking down the hordes of zombies found at the beginning. This was to get to the sewers, instead of conveniently having them find the sewer under the station. It was also thought to have a return to the Spencer Mansion ruins from the original Resident Evil, having to fight a boss that survived the explosion. These ideas were dropped due to limited disk space, as the game was getting too long. One thing that did make it to Resident Evil 2 from the original was a tyrant. The game was never meant to feature a tyrant, but Kamiya was insistent on bringing one in, now that the game needed to be overhauled. Not only that, but Kamiya planned on making the tyrant perfect and invincible, but writer Noboru Sugimura disagreed, stating in a 1998 interview with Kamiya that making the tyrant so strong would render the existence of the G-Virus meaningless. To solve that problem, we came up with the idea of the tyrant having a mission to retrieve the G-Virus. Also, one of the consequences of having players go through the same scenario twice was that, by the second time, they're used to things, and it's too easy. For that reason, we decided to have the tyrant appear in Scenario B as a way to raise the difficulty. While we're on the subject of Resident Evil 0 has a cut Easter egg to the game. In the wonderfully directed original intro to the first game, the STARS team come across a disembodied hand. The official strategy guide for the game confirms the hand to be Edward Dewey's, the pilot of STARS Team Bravo. This was contradicted in Resident Evil 0, where it's possible to see both of his hands intact, unbloodied, when the player finds Edward dying in the train. However, in the prototype of the original Resident Evil 0 for Nintendo 64, it's possible to see that Edward has one bloody hand, meaning they once had something in line with the original canon. Moving on from Resident Evil, but not that far. The survival horror game Evil Within 2 was produced by Shinji Mikami, director of the original Resident Evil. The game contains a classic move from any cheesy horror franchise by referencing the title of the game itself in a character's dialogue. In Chapter 7, shortly after destroying Stefano's paintings, if the player interacts with Liam O'Neill inside the safe house, they will reference the title. That being said, the English version of the game is called Evil Within, while the Japanese name translates to Psycho Break. The respective title is referred to as such in both language versions, before giving a very obvious look at the camera. And now it's time for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today, we're talking about Siphon Filter 3, which released on the original PlayStation on the 6th of November. This release date wasn't what was originally planned, having been changed due to the developers needing to make some last-minute changes. The game was originally planned to release in a dual case with a cover depicting Gabriel Logan and Xian in a federal building filled with green gas and a big American flag in the background. This, however, was due to be released on September 25, 2001, and with the September 11th attacks on top of the score of Anthrax attacks, it was quickly recalled. The images were simply replaced with Gabriel and Xian's heads in a single-disc case and removed any words like deadly, arsenal, and terrorists, while the rest of the world got a slightly close-up version of the original game's cover without the flag. Some of the original copies released before the recall can bring in $1,000 at auction for sealed editions. Today we'll be talking about video games based on movies. Licensed games are notorious for their low quality. This is usually a result of the games being rushed to release alongside a film or TV show, as well as having little to no input from the original creators. This rushed production and lack of supervision usually leads to oversights, some of which can result in a backlash. One such controversy affected 2002's Spider-Man game, which was made to tie into the movie of the same name. The game has several cheat codes which can change Spider-Man's appearance. This includes a police officer, a scientist, and even Mary Jane Watson. If the player enters the cheat code Girl Next Door, they can play as Mary Jane for the entire game. Though it seems innocent enough, it changes the game's ending in a rather bizarre way. At the end of the game, Spider-Man and Mary Jane are supposed to kiss. However, if the player has the Mary Jane skin, it will appear as if Mary Jane is kissing herself. The Girl Next Door code was removed from later versions of the game, presumably because of the bizarre, vaguely incestuous or masturbatory girl-on-girl kiss in an E-rated game. From an E-rated game to an M-rated one. The director of the original Godfather movie, Francis Ford Coppola, has a somewhat strong dislike of the Godfather game. Coppola has stated that he wasn't consulted or even informed about the development of a video game adaptation of his films. He later went on to say that he felt the game mishandled characters, saying, "They use the characters everyone knows, and they hire those actors to be there, and only to introduce minor characters. And then for the next hour, they shoot and kill each other. I had absolutely nothing to do with the game, and I disapprove. I think it's a misuse of film." With that said, GamesIndustry.biz pointed out that Coppola's statement of being unaware of the project is contradicted by an earlier claim from the game's producer, David D. Martini. Martini told GamesIndustry.biz, "We've met with Coppola on one occasion, and we shared with him what our vision was for the game, and where we were going to go. He isn't choosing to participate in the project, but he did invite us up to the Coppola winery, where he has his own private library. He's got a lot of materials from the original Godfather productions. He invited us up there to take a look around, and we sent 4 or 5 people for a week. While it isn't clear who is actually telling the truth, what is clear is that Coppola felt unhappy with the end result of the game." Another film adaptation, Mission Impossible on the PlayStation, has several unused items within its data. These include a communicator, a .45 caliber gun, an M16, and oddly enough, condoms. The item description reads, "Condoms. Once the mission is over and Candice awaits, there's no better choice than the ribbed black ones. For extra pleasure. You don't want to save the world, evade enemy armies, only to get AIDS but some dumb hooker?" Another licensed title with curious content is the NES title Ghostbusters. The game has several major programming differences between its international and Japanese releases. The initial Japanese release featured an oversight in which the Ghost Alarm's purchase price was lower than its resale value. This meant that players could buy the alarm and sell it repeatedly for a profit, allowing them to reach the end building early. This wasn't the game's only issue, however, as the Japanese version had a host of other problems. One example is the game's ending text, which reads from the wrong place in the code. As a result, the Japanese release of the game doesn't show the ending screen or credits at the end of the game. Instead, it only shows a black screen, followed by the text Riri, meaning Lily, scrolling onto it. With the international release, we instead see the infamous, poorly translated congratulations screen. And now, for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today, we're talking about Legacy of Kain Blood Omen for the PC and original PlayStation. Toward the end of the game's credits at the special thanks section, "Coffee Guy" is humorously yelled by an unidentified voice. Coffee Guy! According to Crystal Dynamics' Chris Bruno, the phrase was shouted by Dennis Dyack, who would yell out, "Coffee Guy" to the team whenever the catering truck would show up in the parking lot.